Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be doing a deep dive into communication.
Ooh, communication.
Yeah. We're using Amit Pinchevski's book, Echo, as our guide.
Okay.
And we've actually got a really cool summary of the book,
Nice.
a review of it,
Okay.
and then even some recommendations for other books that we could check out at the end.
Oh, cool.
But one thing that really stood out to me right away was this concept of like an echo effect.
Oh, the echo effect.
Have you heard of that?
I have, yeah. And what really strikes me about echo is that Pinchevsky, he connects communication to, well, everything, basically right from the start.
Yeah, it's like, we think of communication as just this simple thing we do every day.
Right.
But chapter 1 actually lays the groundwork for understanding how important communication is for, well, like our relationships,
Yeah.
our culture,
Mm.
and even society.
Absolutely. Like, it's not just about, the words we say, but it's like the foundation of, like you were saying, everything.
Yeah. And then in chapter 2, Pinchevsky, he actually dives into how crucial communication is for like building trust,
Yeah.
which I think we can all relate to.
Definitely.
Have you ever had like a relationship, maybe a friendship, or even something more
Mhm.
kind of hit a rough patch because something was left unsaid or there was like a miscommunication?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And in chapter 2, Pinchevsky actually gives some like really great examples of how these kinds of misunderstandings can totally spiral out of control if people aren't communicating openly and honestly with each other.
Yeah, it's not just about avoiding like arguments or conflict.
Right.
It's like actually trying to create this shared understanding between people.
Yes, exactly. You need that foundation of trust.
Yeah, for sure. And without that, without that clear communication,
Mm-hmm.
it's so easy for like assumptions to build up
Oh, yeah,
or resentments.
definitely.
And that can really damage a relationship, whether it's, personal or professional.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Pinchevsky, he doesn't stop there, right?
No.
He goes on to talk about how communication shapes the very fabric of our cultures.
That's right. Like, think about it. Our values, traditions, beliefs, all that stuff is passed down through generations, right?
Yeah.
And how do we do that?
Through communication.
Exactly. Shared language, practices, all of it.
So, like, even something as simple as, I don't know, a bedtime story
Right.
that a parent reads to their child.
Totally. Even that can carry, like, a lot of cultural weight.
Yeah, that's so true. And those stories, they kind of become like part of our shared identity, I guess.
Uh-huh.
They shape how we see the world and how we see ourselves and how we see other people.
Exactly. And speaking of shared identity and culture, that kind of brings us back to that echo effect thing, right?
Yeah, that's right. I totally forgot about that.
Yeah, that was in chapter 3, and it really caught my eye, too.
Yeah, me too. So how does that concept, how does that fit into all of this?
So the echo effect, right? It's this super fascinating, it's kind of like a two-way street between communication and culture. It's like messages, they're shaped by their cultural context, but then, get this, they turn around and shape that context in return.
So it's not just like a one-way thing,
No.
but more like an exchange, like a give and take between communication and culture.
Yeah, I like that. An exchange or like a dance.
Ooh, I like that. A dance. Yeah.
So it's like this constant feedback loop.
Okay, I think I'm starting to get it, but can you give me like a real world example of how this echo effect actually plays out?
Sure. Let's take social media, for example.
Okay.
It's kind of like a breeding ground for echo chambers,
Yeah.
where people mostly just see information and opinions that they already agree with. And this constant reinforcement of like their existing beliefs, it can lead to a distorted view of reality.
Right. It's like you're only hearing what you want to hear.
Yeah, it's like shouting into a cave and only hearing your own voice amplified back at you.
Oh, wow. I see what you mean. So is it like everyone's trapped in their own little echo chamber?
Kind of, yeah. And that makes it like way harder to have, those meaningful conversations across different perspectives.
Yeah, totally. But it's not just social media, is it?
No, not at all. Traditional media plays a huge role in this too.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Like, think about the way news outlets frame stories, right? Or which voices they choose to amplify, or even like the language they use.
Yeah.
All that contributes to shaping societal norms and attitudes.
So it's like the media is holding up a mirror to society.
Yes. But that mirror can sometimes be a bit warped.
Warped.
Yeah, like reflecting a certain perspective or agenda rather than showing the full picture.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah.
So we really need to be careful about where we're getting our information from.
Definitely. We can't just passively absorb everything we see and hear. We have to be like critical thinkers about it.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to like question things and analyze them and not just take everything at face value.
Exactly. And it sounds like this echo effect, it goes even deeper than that, right?
The deeper. What do you mean?
Well, you mentioned how communication shapes culture.
Right.
But Pinchevski, he also talks about how even our everyday conversations, like those casual chats we have,
Uh-huh.
those also contribute to this echo chamber of culture.
Oh, wow. So
Oh.
it's like even when we're just, chatting with our friends or family.
Yeah, we're constantly reinforcing cultural norms and values without even realizing it.
It's kind of mind-blowing to think about, like, how even our smallest interactions can contribute to this bigger cultural
Yeah,
landscape.
it's like we're all these little transmitters sending out these signals that shape the world around us.
Yeah, that's a really cool way to think about it. So are we all, like, contributing to this echo effect, whether we realize it or not,
Pretty much. But that's why it's so important to be aware of it, you know?
so that we can make more conscious choices about how we communicate?
Exactly. And speaking of being aware, chapter 3 also delves into this concept of cultural hegemony. Have you heard of that?
Um, I've heard the term, but I'm not sure I could explain it.
It's basically how those in power, they kind of influence the dominant narratives in society. And they often do this through, those communication channels we've been talking about.
So, like, the media.
Yes. And social media, and even like our everyday conversations.
Okay, so if they control the narrative, they control, like, what people believe.
Exactly.
Are-
What they value, how they communicate, all of that.
And because of this echo effect, these dominant narratives, they just keep getting amplified and reinforced, right?
Yes. And that can sometimes drown out like alternative perspectives or voices that don't fit the dominant narrative.
Wow. It's kind of scary when you think about it.
It is. It makes you realize that communication isn't always this neutral exchange of information.
Yeah.
It can be used to maintain power structures or silence dissent or even manipulate people.
So we need to be really careful about, like, what we're consuming
Definitely.
and who we're listening to
Uh,
and how we're participating in these conversations.
Yeah. Exactly. We need to develop those critical thinking skills so we can tell what's real and what's being spun or manipulated.
Yeah, we can't just take everything at face value anymore.
Yeah. That's where media literacy comes in.
Media literacy.
Yeah, it's basically being able to like analyze media messages,
Mhm.
identify biases, evaluate the credibility of sources, all that good stuff.
So it's about becoming, like, informed and discerning consumers of information.
Yes, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with messages from all directions.
Yeah, it's like information overload everywhere you turn.
Right, so we need to be able to filter through all that noise and find those genuine signals, those trustworthy sources.
And it sounds like chapter 4 might have some insights on how to do that.
It does. Chapter 4 is all about understanding the echo effect, especially when we're interacting with different cultures.
Oh, that's interesting. So how does that work?
Well, it encourages us to be more sensitive and mindful communicators, recognizing that not everyone shares the same perspective or communication style.
Right, because what we consider normal or polite might be totally different in another culture.
Exactly. And we don't want to accidentally offend someone or cause a misunderstanding just because we're not aware of those cultural differences.
Yeah, for sure. So how do we navigate those differences without stepping on toes, so to speak?
That's where cultural sensitivity comes in.
Right.
It's basically acknowledging and appreciating the unique perspectives and communication styles that exist across different cultures.
So being open-minded and respectful of other ways of doing things.
Exactly. It's about being willing to step outside of our comfort zones and learn from those who are different from us.
That sounds like a really important skill in today's world where we're all so interconnected.
It is. It's like we can't just assume everyone communicates the same way we do.
Right.
We have to be open to learning and adapting to different styles.
And that's where cultural relativism comes into play, right?
Yes. Chapter 4 talks about that too.
I've heard that term before, but could you refresh my memory on what it means?
It's basically the idea of approaching different cultural perspectives without judgment, recognizing that different cultures have their own unique ways of seeing and doing things, and that there isn't necessarily one right way.
So instead of saying, this is how we do things here, we're saying, let's try to understand things from your perspective.
Exactly. It's about moving away from that my way or the highway approach and embracing the richness and complexity of different cultural perspectives.
It's like building bridges instead of walls, right?
Exactly. And it's about recognizing our shared humanity, even in the midst of our differences.
I love that. It's like by understanding and respecting each other's cultures, we can start to bridge those divides and build more meaningful connections.
Precisely. And it's about using communication as a tool for understanding and empathy, rather than judgment and division.
That's such a powerful message, especially in a world that often feels so divided and polarized.
It is, and it all comes back to that idea of mindful communication.
Yeah, being aware of the impact our words and actions have on others.
Exactly. And choosing to communicate in a way that promotes understanding, connection, and respect.
That all sounds great in theory. But I'm curious, does Pinchevski offer any practical advice on how to actually put these concepts into practice?
He does. In fact, that's what we'll explore in Chapter 5.
Okay, now that's what I'm talking about. Let's
Yeah.
dive into those practical tips and see what Pinchevski has to offer.
So, getting into Chapter 5, one thing that really struck me
Yeah.
is how Pinchevski, he kind of weaves these practical tips
Uh-huh.
with like this broader look at how communication affects, the world.
Right.
It's not just like a self-help book on speaking better.
Mm-hmm.
It's more like he's inviting us to think critically about how we interact with each other.
Yeah, and that's what I love about this whole deep dive. Like, it's really making me rethink things that I usually just take for granted.
Right.
Like, honestly, I never really thought about, how deeply communication and culture are connected before reading this.
It is a pretty powerful realization. Once you see those connections, you start noticing them everywhere.
Yeah.
Like how we talk, the stories we share, the media we watch, even the jokes we tell.
Right.
All of that contributes to this like constantly evolving cultural landscape.
And that echo effect, it really drives home the point that we're not just passively absorbing culture,
Right.
but we're also actively shaping it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Every interaction we have, every message we send, it all adds to this like collective echo that reverberates throughout society.
So we really have to be mindful of how we communicate. Right.
Absolutely. If we're aware of this echo effect
Yeah.
and how it can like amplify certain voices or narratives,
Mm.
we can make more conscious choices about, the messages we send and the stories we help to tell.
So it's like moving beyond just communicating effectively,
Right.
but also communicating responsibly.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our words and actions, they have power.
Mm.
And we can use that power to promote understanding, bridge divides, and, even create a more inclusive and equitable world.
I love that idea. It makes communication seem a lot more, I don't know, meaningful,
Right.
Like it's a tool for positive change.
Absolutely.
But I got to be honest, with all this talk of echo chambers and dominant narratives,
Mhm.
it's kind of easy to feel like a little overwhelmed.
I get that.
Like, how can one person's voice actually make a difference?
That's a valid feeling.
Yeah.
And that's where the whole idea of individual agency comes in,
Okay.
Even though these bigger systems and structures, they do influence how we communicate.
Uh-huh.
We still have the power to choose how we participate. You
Yeah.
can choose to like amplify voices that are often silenced
Yeah.
or challenge those harmful narratives we were talking about and promote empathy and understanding in our own interactions.
So it's about focusing on what we can control,
Yes.
like our own actions and choices,
Exactly.
rather than getting bogged down by the things that we can't.
Right. And even small acts of like mindful communication, they can have a ripple effect.
Really.
Oh, yeah. Like if you consciously choose to listen attentively
Yeah.
or speak respectfully
Uh.
or try to understand different perspectives, you're contributing to building a more positive and constructive communication culture.
I like that. It's encouraging.
Yeah.
Because it means that even if we can't change the whole system overnight,
Right.
we can still plant those seeds of positive change in our own little corner of the world.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
It's like gardening, Creating a more positive communication culture, it takes time and effort. It's an ongoing process, not a one-time fix.
And it's something we can all be a part of, right?
Absolutely.
It's not just for experts or people in positions of power.
Yeah.
It's for everyone.
Exactly. And that's what makes those practical tips in Chapter 5 so valuable by like honing those skills, active listening, nonverbal awareness, empathy, conflict resolution. We empower ourselves to communicate more effectively,
Yeah.
more responsibly, and more compassionately.
So it's not just about understanding these concepts, in our heads,
Right.
but it's about actually putting them into practice.
Yes. Knowledge without action is like a seed that never gets planted.
Ooh, I like that.
It's only by putting these principles into practice that we can truly cultivate a more positive and understanding communication culture.
That's a great analogy. And I think it leads perfectly into those actionable tips from Chapter 5.
Yeah, let's get into it.
What are some of the key takeaways that really resonated with you?
Well, Pinchevski starts by emphasizing the importance of active listening, and I think that's something we can all, work on.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's not just about hearing the words someone is saying. It's
Yeah.
about truly engaging with the person, putting away distractions, making eye contact, asking clarifying questions, really trying to understand their perspective.
It sounds so simple when you put it like that.
It does.
But it's something that a lot of us struggle with.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's easy to get distracted or jump in with our own thoughts before we fully understood the other person's point of view.
Right, and it's human nature to want to share our own thoughts and experiences.
Yeah.
But active listening requires us to kind of quiet that inner voice and truly focus on what the other person is communicating, both verbally and non-verbally.
Speaking of nonverbal communication, that's another key point Pinchevski brings up, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's easy to forget that our body language, facial expressions, tone of voice, all of that, it speaks volumes.
It really does. Like a simple nod or
Ah.
a smile or even a shift in posture can convey so much meaning,
Rob.
sometimes even more than our words.
Yeah, that's true. And being attuned to those subtle cues, both our own and those of others, can really enhance our communication
For sure.
and help avoid misunderstandings.
Absolutely. It's like we're constantly sending out these signals even when we're not speaking. And being aware of those signals can help us become more intentional and effective communicators.
Right, right. But beyond active listening and nonverbal awareness, Pinchevski also stresses the importance of empathy, right?
Yes, empathy is crucial for effective communication.
What does that mean in this context?
Well, it's about putting yourself in the other person's shoes.
Okay.
Trying to understand their feelings and perspectives, even if you don't necessarily agree with them.
So it's about listening with your heart as well as your head.
Exactly. And it's not always easy to do, especially when you're dealing with someone whose views are very different from your own.
Right.
But that's exactly when empathy is most crucial.
Yeah, because without empathy, it's easy to just dismiss or invalidate someone else's perspective.
Right.
But with empathy, we can start to bridge those gaps in understanding and build those, more meaningful connections.
Exactly. It's about seeing the world through their eyes, even if just for a moment.
And finally, Pinchevski talks about conflict resolution, right?
Oh.
Because, let's face it, disagreements are going to happen
Oh, yeah. They're inevitable.
in any relationship, whether it's personal or professional.
Absolutely. Conflicts are a natural part of human interaction.
So what's the key to resolving conflicts constructively?
Well, Pinchevski emphasizes the importance of communicating assertively,
Okay.
which means expressing your needs and boundaries clearly and respectfully. It's about finding that balance between, being honest about your feelings
Right.
without attacking or blaming the other person.
So it's like finding that middle ground between being assertive and being compassionate.
Yes, exactly. We don't want to steamroll over the other person's feelings, but we also don't want to bottle up our own emotions.
It sounds like it takes practice to get that balance right.
It does. It's not always easy to stay calm and collected in the heat of the moment.
That's for sure.
But by being mindful of our communication and focusing on finding a solution that works for everyone involved, we can navigate conflicts more effectively.
And hopefully come out of it with stronger relationships.
Exactly. It's like instead of viewing conflict as a battle to be won or lost, we can approach it as an opportunity to learn,
Yeah.
grow, and strengthen our connections with others.
And it all comes back to those core principles of communication.
Right.
Active listening, empathy, respect.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that effective communication isn't just about getting our point across. It's about building bridges of understanding, fostering connection, and creating a more harmonious and compassionate world.
Well said. Speaking of building bridges, I think it's time we move on to those book recommendations
Oh, yeah, those are great.
that Pinchevski provides. They seem like really excellent resources for anyone who wants to, delve deeper into these topics and expand their understanding of communication.
Okay, so diving into these book recommendations.
Yeah.
Pinchevski, he offers some really interesting titles at the end. Think of it as like a curated reading list to help you, take your communication journey even further.
Oh, I like that. The communication journey. That's cool.
Yeah.
So what are some of the books that really stood out to you on the list?
Well, one that immediately caught my eye was Steal Like an Artist
Okay.
by Austin Kleon.
I've heard of that one.
Love you.
Yeah, but I haven't read it yet.
It's really
What's
good.
it about?
It's basically about creativity and the creative process, and it's a really engaging read, even if you don't consider yourself like an artist.
Okay, cool. And how does this tie into like communication?
Well, Cleon argues that nothing is truly original,
Right.
and he encourages us to like embrace influence,
Okay.
to steal ideas from our heroes and remix them in our own unique ways.
Oh, that's interesting. So it's like we're all building on what came before us.
Yeah, exactly. It's like he's acknowledging that we're all part of this like interconnected web of ideas and influences.
Right.
And that creativity often comes from, building upon what came before us.
I like that. It
Mm.
kind of reminds me of how Pinchevski talks about the echo effect and how it shapes culture.
Totally. It's like we're all participating in this ongoing conversation,
Yeah.
adding our own voices to the mix.
That's a cool way to think about it. What other books are on the list?
Another one that I thought was really interesting was
Yeah.
Breasts and Eggs by Mieko Kawakami.
Okay, I've never heard of that one.
It's a novel, and it's pretty intense.
Intense.
Yeah, it explores themes of womanhood, motherhood, and societal expectations.
Wow, that sounds heavy.
It is,
Yeah.
but it's also beautifully written.
Okay, so how does this connect to communication?
Well, Kawakami's writing, it's very raw and honest,
Mm-hmm.
and it offers a really unique perspective on female experiences
Okay.
and the challenges that women face in a patriarchal society.
Right, right.
And I think it's a good reminder that communication isn't just about, exchanging information.
Mm.
It's also about expressing our identities,
Yeah.
navigating those like complex social dynamics,
Mm-hmm.
and finding our voices in a world that often tries to silence us.
That's such an important point. It's like our communication styles are often shaped by our, social roles and the expectations that are placed upon us.
Exactly. And those power dynamics that like woven throughout Kawakami's novel.
Right, right.
It's a really thought-provoking read for anyone who's interested in like exploring those deeper layers of communication.
I'll have to check that one out. Any other books that jumped out at you?
Yeah, there's one more I wanted to mention. It's called Coping with Difficult People.
Oh, that sounds pretty practical.
It is. It's by Robert M. Bramson.
Okay.
And it's basically a guide to, well, exactly what the title says, navigating challenging interpersonal dynamics.
I think we've all encountered a difficult person or two in our lives.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
So what kind of strategies does Bramson offer? Like, how do you actually cope with these difficult people?
Well, he provides a framework for like understanding different types of difficult personalities.
Okay.
And then he offers some really specific techniques for dealing with them effectively.
Like what?
He talks about setting boundaries, communicating assertively, managing your own emotional responses,
Oh, that's a good one.
especially in, high conflict situations.
Yeah, because it's so easy to get caught up in the other person's like negativity or drama.
It
Yeah.
is. But Bramson, he really emphasizes the importance of staying grounded and maintaining your own composure,
Right, right.
even when things get heated.
Like we can't control how other people behave,
Nope.
but we can control how we react to them.
Exactly. And by learning to communicate more skillfully and strategically, we can navigate those difficult interactions with like more grace and confidence.
It's about empowering ourselves to handle those situations effectively, right?
Yes. Rather than feeling helpless or victimized.
Wow, those are some really great book recommendations. Thanks for sharing those. It's amazing how Pinchevsky has like connected these seemingly different topics through this common thread of communication.
It is. It really shows how multifaceted communication is
Yeah.
and how it touches upon like every aspect of our lives.
Right.
Whether we're talking about creativity or gender dynamics or even conflict resolution, it all comes back to how we connect with each other and make meaning of the world around us.
So before we wrap up this deep dive into Echo,
Hmm.
what's the one big takeaway you want our listeners to walk away with today?
That's a great question. I think if I had to boil it down to one essential point,
Hmm.
it would be this. Communication is not just about conveying information.
Okay.
It's about shaping reality.
Whoa, that's deep.
Every interaction we have, every message we send, every story we tell, it all contributes to the cultural landscape we all inhabit.
Right, right.
And by becoming more aware of this power, we can choose to communicate more mindfully, more responsibly, and ultimately help create a world where understanding and connection prevail.
That's beautifully said. It's like we're all holding these paintbrushes, and with every word we speak, every gesture we make, we're adding our own strokes to the grand canvas of human experience.
I love that analogy. And it's a reminder that even small acts of communication can make a big difference.
Yeah.
By choosing to listen attentively, speak with kindness, and seek understanding, we can contribute to creating a more harmonious and meaningful world.
One conversation at a time.
Exactly.
Well, folks, on that inspiring note, we've come to the end of our deep dive into Amit Pinchevski's Echo.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope this exploration has, sparked your curiosity, challenged your assumptions, and left you with a renewed appreciation for the power of communication.
And how it impacts our lives and the world around us.
Absolutely. So until next time, keep those minds open, those ears tuned in, and those voices strong.
Happy communicating, everyone.
Bye, everyone.